The air hung heavy with a sense of unease, a peculiar stillness that often precedes a storm, though the sky above was a placid blue. Jamie Morton, a man whose life had been a winding, often uncertain path, found himself adrift in a new kind of quietude, one that gnawed at his insides. He was walking, counting his steps, his gaze fixed on the carpet beneath his feet, a conscious effort to avoid the periphery, to ignore the insidious whispers that sometimes stole into his mind. They were whispers that spoke his name, beckoning him, promising an eternal life, an escape from the relentless march of time. Sometimes he could ignore them, a sheer force of will pushing back against the encroaching dread. But other times the whispers were too potent, too insistent, and he would find himself looking up, his eyes drawn to a sight that was not real, yet terrifyingly vivid. The soothing pastel yellow of the hospital wall would ripple and shift, replaced by the grim, ancient gray stones of a forgotten edifice, held together by crumbling mortar and choked with dead ivy, its skeletal branches like grasping hands. A small door, almost imperceptible, was there, just as Astrid had warned, hidden within the gnarled tangle. And from its rusty keyhole, the voice would seep, a chilling invitation to a place beyond the living, a realm of grotesque colors, impossible geometries, and unfathomable abysses where the great ones, ancient and malevolent, dwelled. It was the null, a terrifying void, and the voice was its herald, promising a twisted form of forever. He walked on, resolute, clinging to the fragile thread of sanity, refusing to yield to the spectral call. The horrors on the other side of that door were beyond human comprehension, a realm where death itself might find its end. He clung to a couplet from Bree's last email, a dark, unsettling mantra. That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange aeons, even death may die. A voice, an old woman's voice, whispered his name again, an insidious plea from the keyhole of a door only he could see. Come to me and live forever. And he would answer, just as he had in his fevered visions, a defiant whisper against the encroaching darkness, no. No. So far, he had held it at bay, but he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that something would happen. Something always did, and when it did, he would be drawn to Mother. His story truly began, as all stories do, with an introduction to the key players, the main cast of his life's movie. His family and friends formed the core, while neighbors, coworkers, and teachers filled the supporting roles. There were the bit players, the fleeting encounters, the cheerful checkout girl, the friendly bartender, the gym buddies. And then there were the countless extras, a flowing stream of faces seen once and never again. But then, there was the Joker, the wild card who appeared at unexpected moments, often during times of crisis. In the cinematic world, this was the fifth business, the change agent, placed there by a screenwriter's design. But who, Jamie wondered, was screenwriting his life? Fate or coincidence? He yearned to believe it was the latter, with every fiber of his being, for the alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. And as he contemplated this, his mind drifted to Charles Jacobs. Their paths first converged in the summer of 1962, a time of innocent joy and endless possibilities, in the quiet town of Harwich, Maine. Jamie was 6, the youngest of 5 children, living in a sprawling, perpetually lively home. His days were filled with the rough and tumble camaraderie of his siblings, the comforting scent of his mother's baking, and the rhythmic strumming of his father's guitar. They were a family of musicians, a vibrant, chaotic symphony of sounds that filled their home, from his older brother Frank's rock and roll to his sister Patsy's attempts at folk. Jamie, too, had an affinity for music, a natural ear, and a burgeoning talent for the guitar. He spent his days exploring the woods behind their house, chasing frogs in the peaceable lake, and occasionally, with a mischievous grin, attempting to scare his sisters with stories of Skull Mountain, a local landmark shrouded in a mist of folklore. The Reverend Charles Jacobs arrived in Harwich like a sudden, unexpected gust of wind, a new minister with a young, pregnant wife, a vision for a cleaner, more vibrant church, and an unsettling, almost magnetic presence. He was a man of science as much as faith, a former electrical engineer with a peculiar fascination for electricity in all its forms. He spoke with a captivating eloquence, his sermons not just fiery pronouncements but intellectual explorations, weaving together biblical narratives with discussions of quantum physics and the mysteries of the universe. He was handsome, charismatic, and possessed an unsettling intensity in his eyes. Jamie, a shy, observant child, was drawn to the Reverend Jacobs with an almost primal fascination. It was a connection born not of shared interests in theology, but of something deeper, more elemental. Jacobs, in turn, seemed to recognize something in the quiet boy, a nascent curiosity, a hidden spark. He would often seek Jamie out, engaging him in conversations that, even at that young age, felt profound and meaningful. One day, he showed Jamie a miniature city he had built in his garage, an intricate model brought to life by tiny, carefully wired lights. It was a marvel of electrical engineering, a testament to Jacobs's skill and his almost childlike wonder at the power of electricity. He explained how electricity was life, how it flowed through everything, even the human body, a concept that resonated with Jamie's burgeoning musical understanding of vibrations and frequencies. But the idyllic summer was shattered by a tragic accident. Reverend Jacobs's pregnant wife, who had been a beacon of gentle grace, was killed in a car crash, along with their unborn child. The town was plunged into mourning, a collective grief amplified by the suddenness and cruelty of the loss. The Reverend, a man of profound faith, seemed to crumble under the weight of his sorrow. His sermons, once uplifting and inspiring, grew dark, his words laced with a bitter cynicism, his faith eroded by the incomprehensible tragedy. He railed against God, against the unfairness of life, his voice a raw, wounded cry against the heavens. The town, initially sympathetic, began to turn away, uncomfortable with the minister's public unraveling, his descent into a terrifying despair. Jamie, however, remained drawn to him, a silent observer of Jacobs's pain. He saw past the anger, past the unraveling, to the raw, human suffering beneath. One day, he found Jacobs in a state of profound distress, seemingly possessed by a dark energy. The Reverend, in a desperate attempt to resurrect his wife, had experimented with a crude form of electroshock therapy on a deceased bird, a horrifying, almost blasphemous act of defiance against the natural order. The air in his study crackled with an unseen force, a pungent, almost metallic odor of ozone. Jamie, overwhelmed by the intensity of the scene, fled, leaving the Reverend to his solitary, terrifying grief. The following Sunday, Jacobs delivered a sermon that shocked the congregation to its core. He denounced God, declared his faith dead, and in a raw, unhinged display of grief and rage, cursed the very foundations of their beliefs. It was a sermon that marked the end of his time in Harwich. He was run out of town, a pariah, leaving behind a lingering sense of unease, a void where his charismatic presence had once been. Years passed, and Jamie's life unfolded, a tapestry woven with threads of music, wanderlust, and a persistent undercurrent of unease. He chased his dream of becoming a rock star, a guitar hero, but the path was fraught with false starts, broken promises, and the temptations of addiction. He drifted from band to band, from town to town, a perpetual journeyman in the unforgiving world of music. Drugs and alcohol became his constant companions, dulling the edges of his disappointments, blurring the lines between reality and delusion. Yet, through it all, the memory of Reverend Jacobs remained, a shadowy figure at the periphery of his consciousness, an unanswered question. During one of his lowest points, addicted and desperate, Jamie found himself in a dingy hotel room, his guitar his only solace. He played, the music a desperate cry for something more, something real. And then, a familiar voice, an unexpected echo from the past, cut through the haze. It was Jacobs, older, his hair a distinguished silver, but still with that unsettling intensity in his eyes. He had become a traveling faith healer, a man who claimed to cure ailments through the power of electricity, a strange, almost miraculous fusion of science and faith. He offered Jamie a cure for his addiction, not through prayer, but through a unique form of electrical therapy. Skeptical but desperate, Jamie agreed. The experience was unsettling, a jolt of electricity that coursed through his body, leaving him feeling both invigorated and oddly drained. Yet, it worked. The cravings subsided, the fog lifted, and for a time, Jamie was free. This encounter marked the beginning of a sporadic, unsettling relationship. Jacobs would reappear in Jamie's life at irregular intervals, always during moments of crisis, always with a new, even more potent form of electrical healing. He had developed a reputation, a devoted following of desperate souls seeking relief from their physical and emotional afflictions. His methods grew increasingly unconventional, his cures more extreme, involving ever higher voltages and more elaborate devices. Jamie, witnessing the seemingly miraculous transformations, found himself a reluctant participant in Jacobs's strange world, a man torn between the undeniable efficacy of the cures and the creeping dread of their origins. He saw people healed, their chronic pain alleviated, their long-standing illnesses vanished. But he also saw a subtle, unsettling change in them, a hollowness in their eyes, a lingering flicker of fear. The more Jamie learned about Jacobs's methods, the more disturbing they became. The Reverend's electrical treatments, while seemingly miraculous, left a strange residue, a peculiar susceptibility to a bizarre, almost hypnotic influence. He began to suspect that Jacobs was not simply healing, but altering, twisting something fundamental within his patients, leaving them subtly changed, perhaps even diminished. He learned of secondary effects, strange, unsettling side effects that manifested after the initial healing, violent outbursts, Inexplicable bouts of rage, even suicide. The air around Jacobs seemed to thicken with an unseen energy, a pervasive sense of dread. One day, Jacobs approached Jamie with an offer that sent a shiver down his spine. He wanted Jamie to become his apprentice, to learn the secrets of his silent electricity, as he called it. He spoke of the fifth business, a concept that resonated with Jamie's own sense of being a peripheral figure in his own life. Jamie, caught between his desperate need for money and his growing unease, agreed, albeit reluctantly. He became a silent observer of Jacobs's rituals, a witness to the strange, almost supernatural transformations that occurred. He saw the sick rise from their beds, the lame walk, the blind see. But he also saw the shadows deepen in their eyes, the subtle shift in their demeanor, the insidious, almost imperceptible erosion of their souls. The climax of Jacobs's twisted spiritual journey arrived with the creation of his ultimate device, a massive, elaborate contraption designed to channel the power of the aurora borealis, a phenomenon he believed to be the purest manifestation of silent electricity. He planned a grand revival, a public demonstration of his ultimate healing power, a spectacle that promised to transcend the boundaries of human understanding. Jamie, filled with a mixture of fear and morbid fascination, found himself an unwilling participant in this macabre circus. He knew, with an awful certainty, that something terrible was about to unfold. The night of the revival was charged with an almost palpable anticipation. A crowd of thousands gathered, drawn by the promise of miracles, the allure of the unknown. Jacobs, standing before his colossal device, spoke with an almost demonic fervor, his voice amplified, his eyes blazing with an unholy light. He invoked the names of his angels, the souls of the departed who he claimed were the source of his power. And then, he activated the machine. The air crackled, the sky above them illuminated by an unnatural, pulsating light. The crowd gasped, a collective cry of wonder and terror. Jamie, watching from the periphery, felt a profound disturbance in the fabric of reality. He saw something shift, something tear, as if a veil had been ripped apart, revealing a glimpse into a terrifying, alien dimension. Jacobs, in his manic ecstasy, pushed the device to its limit, demanding more, always more. And then, with a deafening roar, something snapped. The machine imploded, a violent cascade of sparks and screaming metal. Jacobs was engulfed in a blinding flash of light, his body contorted, his face a mask of ecstatic horror. The crowd screamed, scattering in a terrified frenzy. Jamie, thrown backward by the force of the blast, lay stunned, the taste of ozone in his mouth. When he finally recovered, he saw a sight that would haunt him for the rest of his days. Jacobs was gone, vanished, leaving behind only a lingering scent of sulfur and a crater of scorched earth. But he was not truly gone. He had merely transformed, transcended, becoming something else entirely. Jamie, haunted by the experience, began to understand the terrible truth. Jacobs had not been healing, but rather, he had been opening a portal, a gateway to a realm beyond human comprehension. A place where the dead lingered, not in peace, but in a grotesque, eternal suffering. And he had been feeding off their energy, drawing power from their torment. The years that followed were a living hell for Jamie. He tried to escape, to forget, to rebuild his life, but the shadows of Jacobs and the null clung to him like a shroud. He tried to find solace in music, but the melodies were often discordant, tinged with the echoes of Jacobs's unholy hymns. He tried to find love, but the connection always felt incomplete, shadowed by the terrifying knowledge he carried. He became a recluse, haunted by visions of the gray stone wall, the rusty keyhole, and the whispering voice that promised an eternal damnation. He discovered that some of Jacobs's healed patients, those who had suffered the most profound, secondary effects, had succumbed to an even more terrifying fate. They had become conduits, unwitting extensions of Jacobs's will, their minds twisted, their bodies mere vessels for the unseen forces that now flowed through them. They were the nullified, a chilling testament to the Reverend's unholy power. Jamie, knowing he was a prime target, a potential conduit himself, meticulously avoided any lingering traces of Jacobs's influence. He lived in fear, a constant awareness of the unseen tendrils reaching out for him. He researched, desperate to understand the nature of the null, the alien beings that Jacobs had called the Great Ones. He devoured books on occultism, demonology, and quantum physics, seeking answers in the most unlikely of places. He learned of a specific ritual, a dark incantation, that could, theoretically, seal the gateway, sever the connection between the living and the null. But it required a sacrifice, a terrible, unthinkable price. He also discovered that Jacobs, in his altered state, was still active, still drawing power from the null, his influence spreading like a cancerous growth. He was subtly manipulating events, causing accidents, stirring up chaos, all to feed his insatiable hunger for energy. Jamie realized that his own life was not his own, that he was a pawn in a cosmic game he barely understood. His final confrontation with Jacobs, or what Jacobs had become, was inevitable. Jamie, armed with the desperate knowledge he had acquired, found himself drawn to a desolate, isolated location, a place where the veil between worlds was thin, a place where the null bled into reality. Jacobs, or the entity that now wore his face, was there, a distorted, grotesque parody of his former self, radiating an aura of immense, malevolent power. The air thrummed with an unholy energy, the ground vibrating beneath Jamie's feet. Jacobs, his voice a chilling chorus of multiple voices, spoke of his triumph, his eternal life, his mastery over the forces beyond human comprehension. He offered Jamie a place by his side, a shared immortality, a twisted form of salvation. But Jamie, no longer swayed by the allure of power, saw only the ultimate horror, the utter annihilation of the human soul. He initiated the ritual, his voice trembling but resolute, reciting the ancient, forbidden words he had found in the darkest corners of forgotten texts. The air screamed, the ground convulsed, and the sky above them tore open, revealing glimpses of the null, a kaleidoscopic maelstrom of insane colors and impossible geometries. Jacobs roared, a sound that was not human, a howl of pain and fury as the ritual began to take hold, severing his connection to his source of power. The battle was not a physical one, but a spiritual war, a clash of wills against the encroaching darkness. Jamie fought with every fiber of his being, his mind a battlefield, his spirit a fragile shield against the overwhelming power of the null. He saw visions of his past, of his family, of the innocent joy of his childhood, clinging to them as anchors against the existential horror. In a final, desperate act, Jamie invoked the ultimate sacrifice, a part of himself, a piece of his own soul, to fully seal the rift. The pain was excruciating, a searing agony that ripped through his very being, but he endured it, driven by the desperate hope of saving humanity from the encroaching darkness. The ritual reached its crescendo, and with a final, shuddering gasp, the rift closed. Jacobs, or the monstrous entity he had become, was gone, swallowed by the void he had so eagerly embraced. But the victory was not absolute. The null, though no longer directly accessible, had left its mark. Jamie was forever changed, his mind scarred by the horrors he had witnessed, his soul burdened by the terrible knowledge he carried. He was left with a profound sense of isolation, a chilling awareness of the thin veil that separated their reality from the terrifying depths of the unknown. He continued to live, to play his music, but the world around him was forever altered, seen through the lens of his experience. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the whispers would never truly cease, that the door to the null, though sealed, would always beckon. He lived with the constant threat of relapse, of the insidious pull of the darkness he had so narrowly escaped. He understood that the battle was never truly over, that the forces of the null, though temporarily repelled, would always seek a way back in. He was a survivor, but a deeply wounded one, carrying the scars of a cosmic war no one else could see. And so, Jamie Morton continued his journey, a musician haunted by the specter of the null, a man forever marked by the terrible truth he had uncovered. He played his guitar, his music a mournful echo of the battles he had fought, the sacrifices he had made. He lived, but he knew, with every fiber of his being, that he was walking a thin line, forever on the edge of the abyss, forever listening for the whispers, forever ready for the day when the door to the null would once again creak open, and Mother would call him home. He had stared into the heart of ultimate darkness, and a part of that darkness had stared back, leaving an indelible imprint on his soul. And so he walked on, counting his steps, his gaze fixed on the carpet, knowing that one day, perhaps soon, the whispers would grow too strong to ignore, and his journey to the null would truly begin.